Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning or good evening. Welcome to this Tech Talk today, and thank you for joining. My name is Ricardo, and today joining me is Bert Granches. Hi, Bert.
Hey there, Ricardo. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing great, thanks.
Awesome. So today's Tech Talk is a special one because we'll be showing a feature that many of you have been requesting and waiting for, and it's something that is going to dramatically change the way you build native cross-platform apps with Appcelerator. And of course, I'm talking about the Appcelerator App Designer. This is a studio plugin, so it's completely integrated, as you'll see, that will give you a drag and drop interface to build the screens, the views of your app. The way we're going to be running through this is that we're going to be showing you, and Bert, feel free to jump in to help me explaining these topics before we go into a demo mode. We're going to be showing you how to set up Studio to use this plugin. We're going to show you where to get it from, how to install it and get it configured. And then we're going to go through the process of creating XML views with the designer. And we're going to show you how that integrates with the whole development flow. And we're going to be showing you also the components that are part of the designer. This is a tool that if you have been building apps, not necessarily for mobile, even for desktop, you're used to this type of interface, like when you're using Photoshop, and you have a set of tools that you can drag into the screen. That's what you're going to be looking at today, but in the context of cross-platform mobile apps. Just think about the possibilities that you have in creating your apps really, really fast, because it's so visual interface. As I said before, it has a drag and drop design tool. It allows you to add guides to the screen so you can anchor the components and make sure that they are properly aligned. This is crucial as well because as you drag and drop, you want to make sure that everything is pixel perfect. It has integration with the internal TSS files of Alloy. So you'll see that there's a screen where you set the properties for each object. You will see them as they refresh live on the screen, and you will see how that becomes an app, and the code is already updated by changing these properties. You can also add events to objects like buttons and such. You can write the callbacks from Studio, and they will get written directly into your project that is being handled by the visual designer. And lastly, we'll be talking about custom styles and how to overload styles and how to target specific platforms. So I don't know, Barry, if you have anything to add before we go into the demo.
No, I think that about covers what we're going to be covering today. This is designed to be a kind of an introduction to the design tool, and then we'll certainly look at some more deep dive type sessions later on. But I think that covers it for a good introduction, and I'm excited to get started.
Awesome. Let me give you and yeah, switch here and stop here. So you should have control right now.
Great. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. So let's get started. So the app designer is something that we've been looking at in lots of different ways for quite some time. And just by the sheer volume of response and outreach we've had in the past week since we released it in beta through Appcelerator Labs, it really goes to show how much our community's been looking for Appcelerator to come out with an official tool that will help them lay out the views and such within the application. So to get started with the designer, we released it through Appcelerator Labs, and this is where we're going to really start to take advantage of your feedback early on in our product design. We've got several different aspects and products that we've released as part of the Labs effort, and I highly encourage everybody to take a look at all of them. There's some great applications, modules built into this that really accentuate the Appcelerator platform. But to get started with Designer, once you're in Labs, and that's labs.appcelerator.com, just click on the App Designer logo here, and that's going to take you to a quick start page. And from here, you can click on the Install Plugin, and this should pop down a little instruction aspect of how you can get started with Studio here. And this is an integrated part and a plugin for Appcelerator Studio. So it is an integrated part of our tool set, and we're going to be talking about why that's important today as well. But much like any other new tool that you want to install into an Eclipse-based environment, you have an update link, which you can easily just copy here. And then if I take this over to Studio, I have Studio already open. I'll go ahead and hit Help, Install New Software, and then I can simply add this site. I'll call this my Designer Update site. And I'll just paste in this location, hit OK. And it's going to go out and it's going to find App Designer. And I've actually already got it installed, so I'm not going to go through this. But you check this and this, hit Next a couple of times to walk through the installation progress. And then you will be prompted to restart Studio because of some of the components that are getting installed. Once you've restarted Studio, however, you now have full access to the Designer within your environment. And here I have the dashboard. And I've gone ahead and created a blank application, just a standard Hello World application, kind of cleaned it up here, that we'll be using. And I'm using the App Explorer view here to look at my files. And I've actually got the outline view already open, but let me go ahead and close that here. And this is typically what you'd see when you start a new project in Studio or you're opening up an existing project in Studio. So to get access to the Designer, it's important to note that when we're talking about the Designer leverages your code base for all of its UI, all of the design capabilities. So this creates a bi-directional way that you can communicate and develop your mobile applications from a design standpoint. The code affects the design, and the design affects the code. And it's meant to be this way so you can work seamlessly in either format, so that if you're more of a visual developer or graphic designer,
Hey, Bert, I think we lose your audio. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing the same issue. I apologize for this. Seems like we lost the connection to Bert, but he should be joining again real soon, so hang tight.
hey, and apologize about that, Ricardo. It looks like I had a quick network hiccup, so I'm going to reshare my screen. And apologize about that, everybody. Looks like I had a quick network hiccup. So what I was talking about was how we can get access to the designer. So when we look at the views here, again, we're in our app folder. I'm just going to right click on the index.xml. And when I do that, that's going to allow me to open up with the Scratchpad XML editor. And when you do that, it's going to open up several different editors across Studio for you. Now, they may not be exactly in this position, but that's okay. You can always drag and drop them wherever you like just by simply opening or grabbing the tab and moving them around the screen. And this is how I typically will work in the designer environment. So you'll notice that the outline view came back up, and so we'll walk through each of these components. But once you have the outline, the properties, and the elements view in a position that you are happy with, then you can begin to work and develop inside the design tool. Now, working through each of these components themselves, first off, we have the outline view. And the outline view gives us insight into the actual view hierarchy of the XML file. So we see that at the top. And then it also provides a list of styles associated with this particular controller, as well as global styles that we might find in the app.tss. Each one of these, the index.tss and the app.tss, have an impact on what this control is going to look like, as well as any XML attributes. All of these are mashed together and compiled together as we are going through design to ensure that you have the proper look and feel. The properties window is a context-sensitive area that shows specific properties for the selected element. So if I come over here and select the main window, you'll notice that this is going to be populated with all of the Titanium native UI properties for a Titanium UI window. Another nice benefit of the properties window is if I come over here and select a particular property, we have a little help section here. So this actually specifies the actual help text that we have in our documentation for this particular property. So if you don't know what something does, you can always just click on a particular property and it's going to tell you exactly what that property is there for. You also have the capability of adding custom properties to the XML or to the TSS as you see fit. And this is important if you are trying to add on properties to a particular element so that you can query off that later in your application. Maybe you want to assign an ID to a table view row or something like that. Allows you to do that pretty easily here. Finally, we have the elements window. And the elements window is a list of Titanium UI native objects that are accessible to the Scratchpad, and the Scratchpad being the center area here where we're going to be doing most of our design. We have list views, table views, picker controls, tab bars, and button bars, activity indicators, what have you. All of these are readily accessible from the elements window. We're going to be adding more to that in upcoming releases, so keep an eye out for things like widgets in your application to be readily accessible from the elements bar as well, and that's something we're pretty excited about. So let's take a look at just some basic aspects of the Scratchpad too then. So we have the toolbar at the top. This allows you to do some interaction. We have a drop down to where you can select Android and mobile web and iOS types of platforms and device types. And then we have a series of devices that we can specify here that allow you to change the actual form factor of the device you're looking at. So in this case, I'm on an iPhone 6 by default. If I want to go to an iPhone 4S and see how my application is going to look in that case, I can simply do that, and it's going to change the screen dimensions so that I can see how my layout will look in an approximate fashion there. We also can move between landscape and portrait modes, turn off guides that we can pull out from the rulers. We'll look at that in a second. We have an optional drop down here to say how we want to snap two elements. So we have some snapping capability that helps with layout and design. And you can specify exactly how you want snapping to work in this particular case. If there's anchors, so you want to kind of see where elements are, if I click on the anchor here, you'll see that we have 2 anchors here that align to our elements that are on the screen. And then, of course, zooming in and zooming out. Zooming in and zooming out, simply shrink the canvas down as you would expect. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate back to my iPhone 6 view and zoom out just a little bit more. And we can see how we have a full screen here. We also have the nav bar at the top. In most cases, unless you're in a navigation window or in a navigation controller, you're not going to need the nav bar. So to start off, I'm going to select our window element and then scroll down to our nav bar section. And for nav bar hidden, I'm just going to allow that to default to true there. And so we'll get our full screen back. And this is going to map towards what we're seeing on our simulator. I don't have live view enabled in this particular instance. I am working in beta software. And so I'm just going to be doing some generic updates to the application using the CLI. So let's go ahead and start off. And what we're going to design today is just a quick and easy login view. It's going to be similar to what we designed in the video tutorial, but it helps to kind of dictate some key properties and some functionality, and it's pretty simple to understand. So we're going to start there, and we'll do some more detailed videos and tech talks a little bit later on how to use the designer. So let's start by just adding a generic element to the screen, and in this case, I have an image view. So clicking on image view and then just dragging and dropping is going to leave my image at the top and left proportion here. So where I clicked with my mouse on the screen, that's going to map to the top left of that image view. And then based on standard TI UI properties, it wants to fill out the screen. That's how image views want to behave here. So I can do that very easily. You can see we have a background kind of image here associated with that. And I can, as I drag and drop, it's going to affect my left top height and width properties here. And I can always move this around the screen. So once I've done this, it's easy for me to start to position this element where I want it on the screen. You can see that we get a nice little ghosting effect, so you know where your image was, and then you know where it's going to be. So you can see and kind of make minor changes pretty easily. The first thing we want to do now is we want to assign an image to this image view that we've dropped on the screen, and we can do that from the properties window itself. If I come over to the images property, you see we're going to get a nice little help text there at the bottom, and I have an ellipses button that I'll click, and this is going to open a dialog. Now I can select any image on my computer, and what happens is you will be prompted, if needed, to copy into the images folder of your application. So it doesn't matter where the image is, you can simply click on the image and hit open, and if it's not already in your project directory, it will be copied into your project directory, which is a nice little bit of feature set there. And then you can just resize the image, scale the image however you like. Now, you'll notice that we have a left of 23.6%. We're dealing in relatives here. You can certainly use DP or any other type of accepted notation for where you want to place the image on the device, screen dimensions, what have you, pixels, points, etc. But I'm going to go ahead and hit delete this. So just right-clicking and hitting delete. And that's by default going to center this element. So it's going to be centered on the screen on that particular, to the parent, which is the parent window here. So at this point, we have a pretty good size. I think it's a little bit too big, so I'm just going to drag it down a little bit. And then, again, we'll delete that left property and get it centered just how we want it. So that looks pretty well for me. So now what I want to do is go ahead and turn on my guides, because as I go through the actual development of this window, we want to make sure that we have some guides that we can use. So I'm just going to drag and drop some guides here and take my label, and we'll use it as a start position. We'll come down to 4, right about there. That should be good. And drag my label onto the screen. Now, we have a nice size, nice looking label here. We can move it wherever we want. But as I'm trying to align it, you're going to notice that we get some nice little snapping behavior here. And that is a result of our guides. So we have snapping to guides. We have snapping to elements as well. And I have them all turned on so that we can see how this is going to work. And then again, I'm going to specify a right here of 2.8% as well, so that we can see we'll have a nice relative width and height. And then now as we want to go and continue to add in some capabilities here to our screen, I'll just come down and look for my text field. Now here I have a text field. I'm going to drag and drop it. You can see that it's trying to snap to the elements. And it'll actually snap to the bottom and to the left of the elements. So this makes it really easy once you have these kind of positionings in place to continue to position those elements on the screen. And I can drag this over and create a rough width and height here. And again, we'll just drag this over just a little bit more. And now we have our label in place in our text field. Now, because of the fact that this label is based on TI-UI size by default, I am going to make this a little bit higher, so 45. Actually, let's give that a 30. And then that way, when I align my element down, it's going to have a nice little spacing there. So this allows us to do some good spacing. And now that's a little bit light on my border color, so I'll come over back to my properties window on my text field, and I can add in border colors of different colors here using the color wheel and color inspector. Go ahead and select that nickel color. And now when I come back in, it's going to be a little bit darker, which makes it a little easier to see on this white background. Now, adding properties to something like a table view or a text field in this case is really nice. I mean, we can go into the properties windows and things like that, but we're going to also see how we can do this from a style sheet perspective. Now, I've added a few things to the screen and we've started to make changes to the application. So let's take a quick second to see how this is affecting us from a code perspective. Now, at any given time when you're working in the designer, you have two tabs at the bottom of your design view, design and XML. I can easily switch through back to the XML and understand exactly what's happening to my XML view from a code perspective. This XML structure is exactly what's driving this design right here. So you'll notice that we have our image view, label, and text field, but none of the properties exist in the XML. This is by design, by default, that all of the properties are actually going to get created inside of the index.tss. So here you can see where we are pushing all the properties of the designer as we've assigned it to the TSS file itself. Now, again, this is by design, and the reason for this is that we want to be able to enforce and help you understand some best practices. Using Titanium style sheets over adding attributes to the XML gives your application a much greater capability and flexibility as you go to make changes, take advantage of more complicated alloy mechanisms like themes and dynamic styles, so you have a much easier application to maintain and update. That doesn't prevent you from coming in and overloading a particular element through the XML itself. And so let's take a quick understanding of how we do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and close the TSS file. And now we're back in the design view. I'm just on the XML tab. And for example, the label, we want to give this a text of. Now, in doing so, and coming back to the design, you'll notice that that affects the design. So as we made a change to the text, we can see that that's actively affecting the design. Now, if I associated background colors or anything like that at the XML, it would have an effect on the design as well. So now let's go ahead and add some additional components to the screen to complete our login view here. Now, as we've done this before, you'll note that we were coming over here to the elements window. so that you could find that text field or find that label and drag it onto the screen, and that's great. But we've helped you out with a little bit of a shortcut behavior pattern as well here. So if I come over here and select the screen, the window, the actual window itself, I could do create functions. I can do quick create. And as a drop target, this shows all the different types of targets that we can drop onto this particular window. So in this case, I want to add another label. So I hit create label. And here I have a very small label. There's no text by default. So let me go ahead and give this label some text. Call this password. And then much like we did earlier, I can drag and drop and it's going to snap. And I'll give it some spacing between my text field. And then again, I'll quick create on my window here and look for text field. Again, we have our text field here. We'll give it a immediate width of, say, 150, kind of see where we're at. For a height. And we'll snap it into place on our password. Now again, the password's got a default of TIUI size, and we updated the other one to 30, so we'll do the same here. And we'll come back over and give a button color or border radius and color to our text view here. I believe we used nickel last time. So at this point, we can drag and drop as well as click on the anchors to resize. We'll go ahead back up here and set the height of this one to 45 as well. And then we have our layout kind of coming into view here. Now, as you notice, one of the things that we've been doing is we've going into each property for each element to assign that a particular look and feel. So if we wanted to change the border color or the border radius on a particular element, such as the text field here, we've done that at the text field level. And it looks like I got a little bit of a bug that I need to work out. Again, this is beta, so appreciate the flexibility here. But this is important because as you're designing a layout, you don't necessarily want to impact an individual feature or an individual element. You may have several different elements on the screen that you want to behave in a certain way. And that's where our style sheets come into play. So for example, we have, looking over at our outline view, we can see our view a hierarchy as it's being laid out. And we can see how the index.tss is being built out alongside that with each new element that we create. Whenever you create and drag and drop an element onto the screen, we pre-populate the ID for that element. This allows us to leverage the style sheet specifically for that element. At any given time, however, you can add to your style sheet directly through the designer utilizing the right-click menu and the quick create, add new style. So in this case, I'm going to add a new style for the text field. And I will call this text input. And you'll see that that text, actually I need to change that if I want that to be a class. Add new style. I'll do a period in front to denote it's a class, text input. And we'll hit OK. Now we can see that that's part of our index.tss. And if I click on it and come over to the properties window, we don't have any properties currently assigned. But I can certainly add them in with the plus icon and add new key. This allows me to add whatever TIUI property or even custom properties that I may want to a particular class, ID property, or even element properties. We can do this very easily by coming over here and saying, for example, that we want a and we'll call that 1. we'll add a border color. And you notice it picks up the actual property and knows how it should be implemented. So I'm going to come back over here and we'll specify nickel again. And then now if we come over here and come back over to our text fields that we have in place here, I can add a class. So in this case, I'm going to add the text in. And now when I scroll down, you'll see where we have some overridden properties. So if I get rid of this border color that was specified specifically for that element, we're going to pick up the class associated with that. We have a border radius of 10, which we haven't specified across the board. We have a text input border width and a border width. I can get rid of the border width there. Now, if I click off the screen, it hasn't affected this particular text field. However, I may want to come back here and assign that to this element as well. And then come back to my text input and make some changes here. So we may want to say border radius and hit OK, and then go ahead and assign that to 10. And now we can see how everything's come into play and that they both look the same in this particular case. So now we have a style. If I make changes to the background color per se, so we may want to go and say background color. And then we'll just do a very light background color to assign that. You can see that that's going to affect all the different elements of the screen at the same time. So this allows you to affect the classes associated with your view elements as well as the individual elements themselves. And again, a nice aspect of this is that you can debug very easily simply by coming down and seeing which properties are overriding specific properties. So if you wanted to override one, you could always go in and update the background color here or in the XML, and that's going to take the standard order of precedence for titanium styles and apply them appropriately. So it's a really good way to debug as well. So let's go ahead and add a button to kind of complete our view. And I'm just going to align it here to the right. So we have that, and we'll make it a little bit wider. And in this case, I'll go ahead and create another style. We'll just call this a button class. And now I can assign this button the button class, but we haven't added anything to it. And the reason for that is I want to show you another way that you can add properties to classes on a particular UI element. So we've added the class to our button. Now, anytime I want to come down and say update the background color, if I right click, you see that we have multiple different ways that we can affect this background color. I don't necessarily have to work with the ID of that this particular element. I don't necessarily have to work in the XML of this particular element. I can assign a class property to button based on background color. I can come over here, and if I wanted to make all buttons of the same element type, wanted to affect all of those on this particular controller's background color, I could do that as well. Notice we also have ways that we can affect things for particular platforms. So if we wanted to take advantage of the platform-specific attributes associated with an element, we could assign a class or an element type to that particular platform as well. In this case, I'm just going to assign a background color to the class. Coming back to click on it, nice blue color. And then let's go ahead and do the same for color. We'll go back down to class properties. We'll assign this to the button class. And we're going to make that white. And we'll do the same for height and width as well. For buttons, let's say we want to have button heights at approximately, call that 45. we'll go ahead and delete the height there. So that it's going to get precedence back to the class. And for the width, again, class property, we're going to say we want that to be 150 pixels, or density independent pixels rather, and we'll delete the width so that this takes precedence. So now we'll bring this back over, and we can see how we've created that nice view. So pretty quickly, we have a good looking view. We have style sheets aligned to it. I can save the index.xml. We can look at the XML structure, see how this is going to work out. We can update, we made some changes here at the XML level to affect the code and the actual design. We've created classes. Now, if I open up the index.tss, we'll see that we have our button class here at the bottom that was generated through the properties window. We have our text input class, which is something that we created primarily through the class itself versus the actual element property. And so we have all of this working in conjunction together to create the application. And I've gone ahead and rebuilt the app, and we can see how this is looking and lining up, and it looks pretty good. I could make some additional changes here. So if I wanted to perhaps create a border radius for my button, I can easily do that here through the border radius, again, either on the ID of the element, just simply by entering it into the properties view, or if I wanted to affect this at the class level, I could simply create that as part of my border radius for the button class itself. So pretty quick and easy. And to tie this all together now, let's figure out how we can affect this overall application from a JavaScript perspective. So JavaScript drives the business logic of a Titanium-built application. And when you're doing design, understanding the user interface is key to how you want that to work. So in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and right-click on the button, and we can create a function. Now, again, this is context sensitive. So, as you are working with a particular screen or working with you can assign the specific interactions that the user can have all through the designer itself. So in this case, we want to do a click on the button. We'll say on button click. We'll go ahead and do that. And I'm just looking here. Let's go ahead and change that button to have a more logical name. So we'll call this login. And we'll save here. And now if I come over to my index.xml, since we added that event, we'll see that we've generated some code here. The on button click. So here we could do, add in our login to and add some login code here. You could use your network controllers, Titanium network controllers, to make a cloud HTTP request to your backend authentication systems. Quick alert here that says login successful, and see how that works. Simply rebuild my application here. And then once that reloads, we'll see how that ties in. But again, very, very quick and easy. We're able to go and manipulate that. And if you right-click on, say, the image, and I do a create function, you're going to see that we have a lot of different types of events that are, again, contextual to this particular element. So we've got the change event. So if the image changes and you want to capture that, pinch and things like that, these are all things that you can capture on an image. We have a particular text field and we want to look at the functions we can do there. Blur and focus are specific to that. So it's very, very contextual to what you're working on currently. And again, now we have the login view here. You can simply click on that and do login successful. So in a short amount of time, we're able to do a high degree of design and drag and drop layout and start to see how this even looks on different phones that we may want to create. So based on the layouts that I have in place, if I go down to the iPhone 4, it's going to look a little bit squatty for my image, so I may need to do some tweaks there. Coming back to, say, an iPhone 6 Plus, we're going to have a little bit more traditional layout here. It's going to be larger, of course. We're going to have more screen real estate at the bottom. These are things that I'd kind of expect here as well. And then dragging into Android and things like that, we can see how that's going to affect as well.
Hey, Bert.
Yeah, Ricardo.
Yes, so I know this is in beta and probably not all the features are in the version you're running right now, but one of our users has a question of how do you work with platform differences? Like if you want to add something to the screen that kind of renders a little bit different on Android or iOS, is there a way of doing that visually, or is it something that needs to be handled by code?
Absolutely. We can handle that in the designer. So let's say, for example, I wanted to assign this particular image for iOS only. You'll notice that under our properties, we have platform and form factors listed as well as the ID in the class. So I can always come over here and specify this to iOS. Now, when I do that and come over to the XML, notice that the platform iOS is being specified here for this particular image view. So we can affect that in the design itself. And then when I go to click on Android, we'll notice that that's actually being changed and then being stripped out and removed from this particular element as well. So those are things that are really important for your cross-platform design that we've built into the designer so that you can leverage that. Also, I'm just going to delete that real fast. If we come back over here and say we want to go to the background color, and we have a container background color here. And let's see. So if I was to change the class properties of this, so we have container. We already have a container for background color already specified, which is the background window. But notice that we can also affect this from both the platform and the form factor perspective. So at any given time, you can easily, through the designer, specify at the style sheet level or at the XML level which platform you want to associate that particular property. That's a great question.
Cool. Okay, I have a couple more questions. Will there be a way of adding your own custom elements to the elements window down on the bottom right? Like if you, for example, you created a widget or a custom object and you want to drag to as many windows as you like?
Short answer is yes. Currently, we do support widgets, but they have to be in your project, and then you have to add them in manually via the XML, but they will render in your application in the design view. We'll talk about that on a follow-up session in more detail. Now, one of the things we're going to be adding in, we haven't determined if we're going to do it prior to GA or not, but we're coming up with ways that you can package your widgets in a particular manner that would allow them to show up in the elements view itself. So at the bottom of the elements view, you would have a custom section, and your widgets that are associated with your projects are there as well. Now, one other element of this that we want to add in is the ability to pull down elements from the Appcelerator marketplace that are pushed in there, and that's going to be something that's going to be coming probably towards the end of the year, if not first quarter of next year, is a direct integration so that as you're pushing content to the marketplace and the software registry, we'll be able to detect what you have access to and even make that part of the elements view itself to where you can download directly from there into your project and start to take advantage of that.
Oh, so there's a possibility of having like a Appcelerator approved or developed by Appcelerator objects that are already tied to maybe ArrowDB on the back end and stuff like that.
Not just Appcelerator approved, but because the registry is someplace that our community can publish into, you'll have Appcelerator UI components as we create them and publish them, as well as publicly available UI components that were created by the community added there as well.
Awesome. So a couple of people are asking, are there plans of adding support for Windows Phone as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, this actually does work with Windows today. We just haven't added in a specific drop-down selection for Windows, as well as a list of approved Windows devices. If there are specific devices that the community members would like to see, we'd love to have that feedback. And you can leave your feedback at community.appcelerator.com under the Labs Designer section.
Okay, that's great. Let me see. There's another question here. So if right now you have it on iPhone 5, if you make changes here, those changes are going to propagate to all other iPhone devices that you have there by default. And then if you want to just go more granular, you have to go through the form factor and other properties, right?
That's correct. So unless you're using, so form factor, let's kind of talk about that real fast. Form factor affects tablet versus handheld. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about iPhone 6, iPhone 5, or iPhone 4, we do have differences in terms of the screen real estate that's available. So we may very much want to affect that in a different manner. So in this case here, you can see that I was a little bit off the screen because of the way that I position this element. If I change this to say a 3% right and get rid of the left property, then now I don't have to worry about that changing between the different handheld devices. It's always going to be positioned to the right, just where I want it. Now, if you do want to get granular in terms of the actual handheld form factor, there is another property that Alloy offers called the if attribute. And with the if attribute, you can reference an Alloy global variable, and that will determine and act in the same manner as platform or form factor, but whatever the resolution of that variable is, true or false, will determine whether or not it shows or hides that particular element in that particular use case. So for example, if you did want to check that, hey, if we're on iPhone 4, maybe there was something you don't want to show at the bottom because of the size of the screen, then that's something that you could use that if statement for in your XML. So let's say you had if is iPhone 4, for example. And if that evaluates to true, then it would render the element. If it evaluates to false, it would not render that element. Any other questions? I think you're on mute, Ricardo.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Are you familiar with the concept of Xcode constraints? And if you are, is that supported as well?
Currently, Xcode constraints are not supported. Those are things that we would need to add into the Titanium UI layout engine. Now, that's one thing to keep in mind, is that we have modeled the designer off of the Titanium UI layout engine, and it means that allows you to have a very high level of confidence that what you see on the screen is going to be represented correctly on simulator and devices. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, the concept of constraints, we have a little bit of that. It's just done a little bit differently. As you can see, we have the relative positioning. This does allow you to specify constraints in terms of how this is going to work in relationship to the screen dimension, the parent elements, as well as the associated sibling elements in this particular view. Now, because of that, you are, however, we don't have the fancy little lines that we're able to add on to the sides here. We are talking about doing something similar like that. We just haven't decided on the best approach to deal with constraints, as it is something that is primarily iOS specific.
Great. You know that as a side note, something that I personally find extremely useful is the fact that it's part of Studio. Because if you have someone who's working strictly the visual part of your app, that person is actually touching the actual app. It's not like you have to transfer something from a secondary software, convert it into something else to then drag it over. It's extremely helpful.
Yeah, and that was a big aspect. You know, we actually started down this path with a web-based application. And one of the challenges that we faced there was that we didn't want to generate code. We wanted the code to actively be part of the design, especially when you consider things like, you know, groups and teams working together on a particular project. The ability for somebody who's more graphically oriented to be able to come in and design themes and to design concept art and have that directly impact the overall project is hugely valuable. Likewise, being able to come in and work in the XML if that's something you're more comfortable with, or directly updating the style sheet, you know, these are things that are, again, equally impactful from the developer perspective. Bringing these both together inside of Studio allows us to leverage that code base in a manner that is highly collaborative and works really well across the teams. And we're really excited to see how the designers and the UI experts are going to start to take advantage of this for mobile projects and larger teams.
Yeah, that actually makes them part of the team, like more integrated, and that's something that could potentially transform dramatically the way teams work.
We're counting on it. You know, we think it's going to be a big aspect, and you know, the fact that the code is production quality. You know, these views, and as we continue to enhance the designer down the road with things like storyboarding and concepts of that nature, you know, our goal is to ensure that the code that's being generated, the code that is being created, is something that you can use in your production applications. Again, emphasizing rapid development, as well as cross-pollination of your team.
Absolutely. One last question before we sign off. The Alloy Globals on the XML side of things, is that something that came with 5.0, or is that something that is still to come out, or has it been around for some time already?
That's been around for a little while now. So with the if attribute, you know, you can already take advantage of some titanium properties inside the XML, but with the if attribute, we've exposed alloy.globals, and that was done several releases ago, so that you could in your alloy.js, for example, do some compilation of, you know, settings on the device to, you know, to get an understanding of whether or not you want to be able to showcase those UI elements. So we added that in at that time for those specific types of attributes. Keep in mind that you can always use alloy.globals inside your TSS files as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Great. Well, that's the time we have for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Bert. John has just added to the chat window of this event the link to the place on the Q&A where you can keep on continue this conversation. We will be looking at that at those topics there, so we can help you further. And make sure you try it out. I hope you like it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. And you know, we're really looking forward to your feedback and seeing what great things you can make with the App Accelerator Designer. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.